Hello and welcome everybody. We're very happy to see everybody on, even if it's not live. Zoom is an excellent thing. So anyway, we're going to start with alphabetical order. So Robin Becker has published 6 books in the Pitt Poetry Series, most recently The Black Bear Inside Me in 2018. Her book reviews and poetry have appeared widely in publications, including the American Poetry Review, the New Yorker Poetry, Prairie Schooner, the New York Times. Becker taught in the writing program at MIT for 17 years and served as liberal arts research professor in English and women's studies at the Pennsylvania State University for over 2 decades. Please welcome Robin Becker.
Thank you, Harris. Thank you for welcoming me to this series. And I have to say how wonderful it is to read with Lloyd and Gail, whose poems I've loved and lived with for so many years. And I'm looking forward to hearing some poems that I don't already know, as well as some that I do know. I'm going to read a combination of new poems and poems from The Black Bear Inside Me. This poem is from an anthology called Essential Queer Voices in U.S. Poetry, edited by Christopher Nelson, and it just came out with Green Linden Press. So this is a poem of mine that's in here. It's called Dyke. The word came after me, then hid each time I turned to look at it. It breathed in the hedge. I could hear it bite and snap the air. I feared the woman with slicked back hair sitting on a bar stool, her back to the dance floor, a beer in her hands. Disco drove the word away, but it came back. Bull dyke, bull dagger. What did the word want with me? And why this dread, this desire, this dangerous butch striding through Kenmore Square, uncamouflaged? Dyke had a spike in it, a cleated surge. In leathers, the word leapt 18th century grill work on the Boston Common and led the parade around the city, the slow, snaking, joyful motorcade of a new millennium. First, I had to hate her. Then I had to hurt her. The rest of my life, I ate from her hand. This poem is from a childhood experience, as you'll see. And it's called Rodeo Ben, 1893 to 1985. Happy trails to you, Bernard Lichtenstein, tailor to the stars, who outfitted Gene Autry and Roy Rogers and little riders like me at 6240 North Broad Street and Godfrey, across from the hot shop, where in 1959, my father ordered the mouth-numbing orange freeze. We watched the door for Bronco Busters coming in for lunch, and once he swore he saw Hopalong Cassidy get into a Cadillac. Bernie, you recast the man from Lodge, immigrant stitcher for Bluebell and Wrangler, as Rodeo Ben, the Yiddish-speaking king of cowboy wear. From Cincinnati, Leonard Franklin Sly emerged a buccaneer, a buckaroo. Lucille Wood Smith fashioned herself into the wholesome Dale Evans, riding buttermilk, envy of young cowgirls who copied her style at Rodeo Ben's in fringed vests and turquoise shirts embroidered with cactus flowers. I wanted tan breeches and a black Melton jacket, a velveteen covered helmet, and tall black leather boots. Ben sold those too, For English riders, out came Ratcatcher and Stockpin with a tiny horse's head encased in acrylic. Don't Fence Me In played in the background as I tried to look like Althea Rogers Smith, British show jumper and winner of the Queen Elizabeth Cup. My father pulled out his wallet. I gathered up my boxes, dreaming myself into a tale of pluck. No longer that terrified girl at the post and rail who couldn't get her timing right and rose seconds late from the saddle, and who, when her horse veered from the fence, corkscrewed head first into it. I never left that frightened girl behind in the dressing room at Rodeo Bends, though I tried. Each time I saw the ambulance parked by the show ring, I knew it waited for me and for my father climbing in beside me, fumbling with the buttons on the expensive shirt as the siren rang out our sweet, unsustainable dreams. Theory. As the animal returns on a beaten path to the den, we go back over the facts, certain we ignored clear signs. I left for Italy that summer, though she had quit her job and moved back home. I knew it signaled a bad turn, but chose the Tuscan love affair in the 17th century olive mill. We say we survive our siblings' suicides, meaning we stood with our parents at the unthinkable graves. In one theory, the troubled family sacrifices one member as plants surrender leaves in times of drought. This poem is called Eating Greenland. This year, Nina chose for her birthday's theme, climate change. Dressed as a sperm whale, one guest explained the melting ice sheet. A costumed glacier reported on the average 11-degree rise in winter temperatures. Nina's sister brought a birthday cake in the shape of Greenland, the icy, snow-covered central region coated with world coconut shavings. Immortal jellyfish plunged a knife into the cake, like a Cold War scientist extracting a core of ancient ice for Camp Century. Secret subsurface trenches hid a nuclear reactor and dorms for soldiers building missile sites should Russia strike. In 1965, they abandoned the lab and its toxic waste beneath collapsing walls of ice. This year, we eat Greenland, piece after sparkling piece. This poem is called The Inner Life, and I think it kind of enacts something that many of us are kind of going through at this point in our lives. The inner life. I thought I was finished with beauty, having shed, given away, or sold so much, and committed myself to necessary objects only. Ready, I thought, for the journey to simplicity, to matters of the soul. But when I saw a tiny reproduction of Eleanor Ray's Snowy Owl 2020, 6.5 by 8 inches, oil on panel, I had to have it. Bone, eyes, turbulence, appetite, little savage, little hunger on the dune. And I think I'll end with a poem called Common Good. To have a mailbox on the road is to know good government. Delivering what's mine and yours, rain or shine. To have a zip code, a state, when countless stateless people have no protection conferred by law, confers a protection I take for granted. Delivering daily its imperfect form of the common good to those who have an address, whom chance didn't bomb into statelessness. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robin. That was wonderful poetry. And next up, we're going to have Gail Mazur. Gail is the author of 8 books of poems, most recently Land's End, New and Selected Poems. In 1973, she founded the Blacksmith House Poetry Readings in Cambridge, which continues to this day. If you do the math, that's over 50 years. She has taught widely in graduate programs, including at University of California Irvine, University of Houston, Emerson, and BU. Please welcome Gail Mazur.
Thank you. Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
It just told me to unmute and I didn't know I was muted. Robert, that was terrific. It was too short. I'm going to read, I think the poems I'm going to read are not in any books yet. And the yet is kind of optimistic.
Yeah.
Texas roaches. I taught in Texas, as you said, for a year, and it's living in Texas is very different from New England, and the wildlife is very different. Texas roaches. That steamy night, 3 of them came, lugging their amber carapaces like too heavy luggage, their footsteps clicking and clacking across my borrowed bedroom's oaken floor. Bigger than my thumbs, almost big as Santa Monica mice, demanding from me, only a tenant, their fair price. Tough as lead nails, millennial survivors, all that term they'd clacked for snacks, leapt to my bed, scrunched together at my hip, snorted crumbs from my blanket, and smeared my moody Chekhov. Use in my credulous youth, I swore to revere all life, no matter how repellent, how crude the nervous system. But I made small kissing noises for Mensch, my Russian blue, a creature who'd eat anything tasty, living or baked, that he could feasibly torture and devour. His step killingly soft, his furry hind parts twitched in feline anticipation. His teeth made hideous gnashing noises. Oh, those mammoth roaches, I told myself, they knew nothing of my sorrows. Houston that night, heartless, I rolled on my side, turned a blind eye, a deaf ear, and slept to the feral music of my blue cats crunching. There's some vulgarities in this reading. Nobody fucks with me. That's one of them. Nobody fucks with me. Lower Broadway's midnight 50 years ago. Rattling boom of trucks cannoning over iron plates. In our legal loft, the studio gone quiet. In the loft, our children sleeping. The 19th century Lord and Taylor building, elegant a century before on the Ladies' Mile, then wholesale novelties, artist lofts, basement shuls, our pornographer landlord. 20-foot high ceilings at the edge of the garment district. I'd lie awake waiting to hear the basso profundo boom up lower Broadway's canyon, to vibrate in the homely dark to a deep-voiced stranger whose defiant mantra was part protest, part proclamation. Every night come to lead me, his roar reverberating up the cast iron block, roar I wanted to believe, to belt out with him. Nobody fucks with me. Nobody fucks with me. Wasn't that why I chose to do what I chose to do? And with luck, keep choosing, still trying to make what I need to make, to find the way to do it on my own. And if nobody hears it, if nobody cares, whatever comes of it, at least nobody fucks with me. This next thing I'm going to read is part prose and part poems, and I'm not going to stop and tell you which is poem. It's called October 2001. So that was right after September 2001, just to get you acclimated. I probably had given her 2 minutes that Monday evening. I was on my way out to a reading. What poet was reading, I don't remember. Since then, I've tried not to regret not letting her phone ring longer. I assume naturally she was ignoring it or holding onto her doorknobs, struggling to get to it, to haul her tottering little body from her kitchen to the den she'd been living in for years. No answering machine, no computer there or cable, just the TV on around the clock, 3 channels of reruns of lively, familiar tedium. Her reaction to 9/11, to 24 hours a day footage of the towers imploding, of live bodies falling, bodies incinerated, the devastation, its implications, indifference. She didn't want to hear about it. According to her, I was sentimental, soft. What moved her? She could decide when something moved her, and it would never move her to tears. She worried about her stocks. New Yorkers were alien to her, without gentility or finesse, aggressive, rotten. The Empire State Building had gone up when she was in girls' Latin school, swooning over Cicero and Shakespeare and the history of England. Her sweet walk home along Huntington Ave then was all bookstalls, idyllic, golden days. The day before, I'd walked from Midtown to Ground Zero, the numb, somber world of it, strange smell of it, wondering what would change, what wouldn't. Apocalyptic, I thought, no new word for it. The mayor, America's mayor, now just another creep, had asked us all to shop. Most stores were open, so I bought socks, bought cords for our devices. There was no thing to want, really. And I'd been relieved she didn't share our animal bewilderment and terror, the grief that seized us. To her, what happened could have happened on another planet. She just switched channels. There'd always be Perry Mason and Della Street somewhere. I'd come home too late to try calling again. The next morning, the hockey coach who lived next door phoned to tell me she'd collapsed. He'd knocked, then seen her through the kitchen window on the floor and called 911. I didn't ask him anything, just sped the 8 miles to my childhood home. On Kingswood Road, an ambulance was moving silently away. No siren screaming, no patient, I thought, no life-saving care. In the dining room of my mother's house, 2 policemen were searching her old leather purse for information. Are you the daughter? There'd been no rush to emergency. I could see she died cooking, her crumpled body on the kitchen floor, a wooden spoon in her hand. I think she'd have liked that to have died stirring. Maybe when I was calling, the daughter, her pot of stew had blackened. Little body, little clump of clothes, my blue-eyed mother face down on the linoleum floor, a ladle still in your hand. I didn't turn her over to see her expression or if her nose was broken. She'd have hated that, the way she'd have hated my writing this. But I studied the scene like a detective. I found no signs of struggle, no evidence she tried to move or cried out, no indication she'd been alive when she fell. Then the cops left, satisfied her death was from natural causes. The coach's wife brought over bagels and coffee. I was grateful. I admired her tact. Had there ever been a bagel in any house on Kingswood Road but ours? My brother came, and my sister and Levine's came, respectful of our privacy. They'd buried our father. They had a file on us. Back then they'd said, your mother, may she live 100 years. They draped her with a white sheet the size of one of her tablecloths, plain but for the blue Star of David. We followed the gurney over the cracked front walk to the hearse, the beginning of the end of our following. The black doors opened and closed. Little death, I thought then, so singular and so ordinary. And in my hollow ear, I heard her voice speaking clear and firm, saying definitely to me, you did as well as you could, all I could ask for considering our story. And what went with you, mother, all the cutting, the stirring and the broiling, the pinches added, the straining, the spicy goulash, the meatloaves, the blintzes, the pies, the forgiving and also the unforgiving, the sweet and bitter peppery stew of your life. And I'd partaken of it all along, my mother, and I was fed. So the next, I think, the last poem I'm going to read is the poem to the poet Alan Dugan, who was, if some of you probably knew him, I know you did, and some probably haven't heard of him yet, but he was sort of a scabrous, unyielding person, refused to have any social graces, but he was a great poet. And I got to work with him on stuff in Provincetown for several years until his death. So I did get to be very fond of him and I admired his work. Untitled for Alan Dugan. I've got writer's block. Your self-loathing mutter after chemo, writer's block. Bourgeois indulgence of the pampered. Had you finally confronted Coleridge's indefinite, indescribable terror? Months later, I asked if you're working. Yeah, I'm making notes. Notes, lifeblood our good days pulse with. Work, the only of onlys. A lifetime of punishing your body, how you must have loathed it until the body refused to collude anymore. You were physical records, still your cauterizing intelligence not quite disabled, and you'd never admit despair, only disgust at your own womanish complaint, writer's block. You were kind to the young, to the marginal. Didn't we all think of ourselves marginal? Dismissive to the rest of us as we hung? You said so little on your every caustic word. Some of your poems you titled untitled poem. Fuck the indexers, the Ivy academics. Your lack of pretension, or was it arrogance, an offering to the god of poetry, or a thumb in his eye. Old iguana, cold-blooded, spiny one, could you have relished the world's disorder, but aboard the world? When a doctor warned drinking would kill you, you'd show up at my house with a six-pack of Caliber, still a tough guy. I knew you were glad to see me, even with no gun in your pocket. Now I recite your lines to myself, still tickled by my own limitation of your gruffness. I love to grunt, Dugan style. No, style isn't the word. Oh, I got up and went to work and worked and came back home and ate and talked and went to sleep. With its undugan-like volta, love must be the reason for the weak. Caustic, graceless, you were a hard man, the least playful except sometimes, the least playful except sometimes in your poems. Still, poetry was no game, was it? Art making's a job, the worker shows up for it. Your early day job at the diaphragm factory fit your adamant refusal of the romantic. Above your desk when you died, shelves of drafts, unfinished and finished poems, each in its old faded brown envelope. Have they been forgotten, lost, shredded? Poems so singular, so unaccommodating, writers I know would kill to steal them. That's my reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. That was wonderful also. And of course, your most memorable poem, for better or worse, will be that first one. The one with the vulgarities in it. No, it was, all your poems were lovely, but that was, the first one was a little bit, how should we say, colorful.
That was Texas Roaches.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
That was Texas Roaches, the
Oh,
first
no.
one. So you mean
Well-
the second poem?
The second poem, right?
Nobody fucks with me.
Right, that one was colorful.
Yeah.
At any rate, all the poems were quite lovely, and it's been a really, really memorable evening so far, and it will be continuing to be such with our next featured poet. This is an incredibly wonderful evening of poetry, and please, next featured poet is Lloyd Schwartz. He's Somerville's current poet laureate, also Frederick S. Troy Professor of English Emeritus at UMass Boston, editor of Elizabeth Bishop, and critic for NPR's Fresh Air and WBUR. He's been awarded the NEA, the Guggenheim, the Academy of American Poets Fellowships in Poetry, and the Pulitzer Prize for Criticism. His latest book is Who's on First? New and Selected Poems. Please welcome Lloyd Schwartz.
Thank you. What a absolute pleasure to be reading with Robin and Gail. I just thrilling to hear the new poems, and thank you so much. I am going to read 3 new poems tonight, relatively new poems. One brand new, and they get longer as they go along. I should just warn you. The first is it's a translation of I think just a wonderful poem by the great Hungarian 20th century poet Attila József, and it's called The Gardener's Song. In a garden of my own making, the trees and I will soon be waking. Shyly I'll while away the hours, planting seeds and tending flowers. And so I'll sow, and so I'll reap, planting, planting in my sleep. So what if all the flowers are weeds? Don't all of us derive from seeds? I'll drink my milk and smoke my pipe till even my good name gets ripe. If danger's lurking all around, I'll plant myself inside the ground. We need this, east and west. We know this, know what's for the best. And if the world's too late to save, I'll plant a flower on its grave. I was recently invited to write a poem about a famous writer who has lived in Massachusetts and their house. And wasn't sure I could write anything on demand, but I thought I would give it a shot. And this is the shot. It's called Intimate Visits. I was lucky. I knew a great poet, and she was kind to me. The first time we were introduced, I told her I loved her poems. Thank you, she replied, then turned and walked away. Years later, I thought writing about her could be my rescue. But having come to know her deep sense of privacy, I asked her if she would mind. I'm afraid there's not much to write about, she demurred. I told her to let that be my problem. Then she asked, but would you finish it? Was she being motherly, fearing disappointment, or expecting it? Then she asked if I would like to meet with her, to help if I had any questions. So I came to her apartment for exactly 1 hour at a time, and she would tell me stories about how hard it had been for her to get published, about what she had written under a pseudonym or published anonymously, or who her poems were really about. Things, she said, she'd never told anyone. Once I asked if she would explain a certain line. Her answer, but it's obvious. Her sign that I could never again ask anything directly about her poems. One day, she was expecting the books she had put in storage. Anyone who'd help unpack them and brush away the insect powder, she had allergies, could keep any of the books she didn't want for herself. I wanted them all. Years after she died, I slid her modern library giant Freud off a shelf, and a piece of onion skin, a bookmark, slipped from between the pages. An intimate note she'd written to her lover in the hospital, whose family had tried to destroy all their letters. Your doctor doesn't seem to realize the boredom of hospital life for you when you are not asleep, that is. But I do. On one of my visits, we were interrupted by her doorbell, an unexpected delivery. We sat together on her couch as she unwrapped the package, a book she was in. She opened it to her page, a poem of her own, along with one she had chosen by another poet. And on a facing page, a recent photo, a full-page picture. I told her, not lying, that I thought she looked beautiful, thoughtful and elegant, though her hair was a little wild and her cheeks a little puffy from her medications. Without a word, she took the book and disappeared. After how many minutes, she finally returned and handed me the book, which I then continued to peruse. But as I leafed through the pages, I couldn't find her photo. The page was gone. The photograph was gone. With remarkable precision, she had torn it from the book. And the last poem I'm going to read is the longer one, the longest one. And as Harris mentioned, I've been a music critic for many years. Um, uh, and this is a poem that really, in which I really tried to combine my my interest in classical music and writing poems. It's called Arthur Schnabel and Joseph Szigeti Play Mozart at the Frick Collection, April 4th, 1948. Two of the greatest musicians who ever lived couldn't record together. They worked for competing companies, but they admired each other and occasionally played together in public. One concert took place at the Frick Collection, the most refined museum in New York. Just outside the concert room hang some of the masterpieces of Western art: Bellini's St. Francis, Rembrandt's self-portrait, Titian's, a Velázquez, 3 Vermeers. It seems right. That concert must have been broadcast on the radio. Someone must have recorded it. I didn't know it existed until a friend surprised me with a copy for my birthday. One of my most cherished gifts. The greatest pianist and the greatest violinist of the century, I had never heard them perform together. I couldn't imagine it. Schnabel's uncanny delicacy, his sense of tragedy, a trill that suddenly sees into the abyss. Szigeti's visceral touch, his heartbreaking soulfulness, his speaking inflections. Could they really play together? If anything, they are more intimately responsive to each other's odd individual voice, than almost any other musical collaborators I've ever heard. Ella and Louis, her heavenly sweetness, his earthy growl. More immediately, intuitively responsive to each other than almost any pair of musicians I've ever heard. Mozart's Sonata in E flat, K481 as it's usually referred to, one of the wondrous later pieces he wrote in Vienna. He was nearly 30. In less than 6 years, he'd be dead. He was one of the inventors, one of the masters of the kind of music making in which the players are equal partners, not just a soloist with an accompanist, collaborators, conspirators. In K481, the players are equals, not identical, but equal, a partnership in which both partners can maintain their own personality, their own individuality, not identical, but equal. Schnabel begins with an enunciation, 3 firm notes. Then Szigeti puts the period on Schnabel's brief sentence. Or is it an exclamation point? Then Schnabel relaxes, almost whistling a little tune. Szigeti gives him room. Szigeti softens too. Their first moment of equal tenderness, not exactly toward each other, but a sudden, easy acceptance of the possibility of goodness, of kindness in the world. They're mutually content, in accord. They share their accord. In the slow movement, Schnabel is singing a lullaby, or is it a love duet? Lovers parting? And Szigeti is humming along. Then suddenly, it's the violin singing, a quiet lament. Szigeti trying to hide at least some part of his grief, while Schnabel insists, gently insists, on getting past this. When the opening melody returns, Schnabel incorporates Szigeti's lament, and Szigeti extends his. Near the end of the movement, the violin suddenly, urgently leaps into another register, another world, as if staying on the earth were just too hard, in fact, intolerable. Schnabel's piano flutters in agitation, then resigns itself to allow Szigeti to pour his heart out. Schnabel lets him, waiting for Szigeti to return to the ground, which he finally, though with some apparent reluctance, does. And once again, they are both part of the same world, where crying out against grief and accepting it are inseparable. Can there be a happy ending? Szigeti, maybe reluctantly, seems finally to have passed through lament into something close to joy, bringing Schnabel along with him. Or is this joy exactly where Schnabel was heading from the very beginning? They are soon not just resigned, but happy, equally, if not identically happy, increasingly exuberant, playful, teasing, increasingly a couple. Is that a tear about to fall? Whose? But no, they continue their game. Yes, they say. Yes, we're all right. It's all right. Mozart says it's all right. Mozart says yes. In a concert at the Frick Collection in 1948, Arthur Schnabel and Joseph Szigeti played Mozart's yes. Thank you.
Well, that was remarkable. The whole evening has been memorable, and I know that's kind of a pairing of cliches, but is so true. And it's been breathtaking. And I want to thank the three featured poets, Robin Becker, Gail Mazur, and yes, Lloyd Schwartz. Yes.